Hi and welcome to the first flip lesson of the semester. Being the first lesson, I'll give each of you a brief rundown of how this concept will play out. Each week there'll be 1 to 2 short videos based around a literary concept or idea, such as a character type, a plot device, writing styles, so on and so forth. The reasons for this are twofold. One is to provide you with information that you can revisit at any time so you can prepare for your creative writing assignments later on in the semester. The second is to actually make better use of our class time. The best parts of our lessons are usually the class discussions and activities. You guys get so engaged and it's really, really awesome. So by removing the boring bits where it's just me going on and on and on, you guys seem to be napping most of the time anyway, we can actually maximize all the better elements of our class, which I think will work really well for everyone all around. And before we get into the video, just remember that if you have any pressing questions or thoughts, be sure to jot them down and bring them up in class. Alternatively, you can utilize the Q&A forum page on this site and discuss the ideas with all your peers. That way we can get even more discussion going outside of class hours. So, without further ado, here's the first flip lesson. It'll be on the concept of the Byronic Hero. So, what is the Byronic Hero and where does the term come from? Well, the term is actually named after Lord Byron, a famous English writer and poet from the early Romantic periods of the late 1700s and early 1800s. His full name is actually George Gordon Byron, which I think is kind of funny because everyone else just knows him as Lord Byron. Didn't even realize he had a first name. Anyway, here's a picture of the guy, pretty suave looking. He was quite a popular dude back in the day. He lived quite a short life, actually. Born on the 22nd of January 1788 and died on the 19th of April 1824. Byron was really, really influential. He had a lot of friends who were also writers and poets and critics. And he had a really big sphere of influence. He wrote quite prolifically. Here are a few examples of some of his famous works, which I really recommend checking out at a later date if you have the time. They're well worth a read, especially Manfred, which is actually a personal favourite of mine. Here are just some examples of covers from those books that you can find later on. Just before we move on to the actual topic of the Byronic Hero, I just thought I'd like to point out something really interesting about Byron. He actually had a really massive influence on pop culture in a way that most people wouldn't even notice. He actually influenced the creation of 2 of the most famous gothic horror characters and tropes that are still existent to today. He had a party at his house where he invited a bunch of his now famous writing colleagues, such as Mary Shelley and John Polidori. And there, they came up with a contest to see who could create the idea or begin writing a new gothic horror story. And it was at this party, at this event, that Mary Shelley created the idea for Frankenstein, and John Polidori began writing The Vampire. And as we know, Frankenstein's monster and vampires are 2 massive parts of pop culture and horror culture that are still existing to this day, which I think is really, really awesome. Anyway, so, the Byronic Hero. What is it? It's actually a character archetype which actually technically dates back before Byron's writing became even popular. But he used it so often and did it so well that it was then named after him, which is quite cool, I think. He influenced the genre so much that a character trope was named after him. So these characters are very, very charismatic. They just draw everyone in. It's just, there's something magnetic about them. These characters are just super, super confident. They have such strong passions and ideals, and they stick to them no matter what, that, it makes them quite confronting to the others that they're around because they're just so intense all the time. However, they're also incredibly flawed individuals, and this sort of causes them to act out in ways that normal people and the people in the world that they inhabit would consider to be reprehensible and just unthought of, which is why they're often also very aloof, sort of loners. We've seen a recent trend, though, that these behaviours are becoming more and more romanticised to the point where audiences are positioned to often always side with this type of character. They're often always falling on the side of a good Byronic hero as opposed to a more negative type of portrayal. Gender also plays a really big part in this character archetype, unfortunately. Being created so long ago in a male-centric world, the majority of the characters were written as males, and we find that there aren't too many female characters that fall under this representation, which is a shame, because I think a female character that embodies these sort of traits and concepts would be a really, really interesting sort of character. We're starting to see a few more of them pop up in books and movies and the like, but it's slow going, but hopefully we'll get there. Anyway, moving on. These characters have really, really strong personal beliefs, as I've mentioned before, and that drives them, but it also makes them quite introspective, and they're often seen as dark or brooding, sort of just dwelling really deeply in their own world, in their own pains and, the injustices of life. And this can sometimes be seen as a type of overindulgence. They're very self-centered, even though what they do affects a lot of people around them. As I mentioned, they have a dark or troubled past. This is sort of where they get their motivation for being who they are, whether it's, a previous life of crime, deaths in the family. It varies, but at the core of these characters, there's always something that is troubling them or just impacting their life in a way that they see as negative. This is where we get to the split. We call it the Byronic Hero, but are they heroes, anti-heroes, villains? Where does it all fit? And the interesting thing is, it's a bit of both. Very similar to the anti-hero, they're often put in a position where they're going to have to do something good that will benefit everyone, even though they don't want to, and often their sense of belief and confidence, helps them to take on that role. But just as easily, they could just get up and walk away and leave everything as it is, and let the chips fall where they may. Which is why it's a really, really interesting and really, really nuanced character type. Tying in with this idea of whether or not they're the hero or they're just going to let things pass them by, we see these characters often go one of two ways. They'll push through and persevere and often meet some sort of tragic end, going down in a blaze of glory, so to speak. Or they'll succeed, and in such a way that it brings about a revolution for everyone else involved, and that usually leads to good outcome, which is where the heroic nature of the character sort of derives from. And this still doesn't really help the Byronic character themselves finding their place. They're still going to rebel against the rules and the values of the society and keep on doing things their way. But that's obviously what makes them such an appealing character in the first place. And hopefully it's something that you guys can draw on, in your future writing and character studies and things like that. So, just moving on here, we can see this is a gigantic list of a bunch of character traits and attributes that we often find in Byronic Heroes. As you can see, there's plenty of them, and not every single Byronic hero has every single one of these things. Writers will often take the best bits that they think make the best character. So you'll have some that are, really brooding and self-critical, and others that are just, incredibly passionate and really introspective. But all these things go together to create, really, really interesting and complex characters. This is something that you can look at in your own time. Obviously, it's a massive list, so feel free to go back and pause and take a look at it whenever you need some sort of ideas. Alright, what we're going to do now is a short activity to sort of finish off our first lesson. It's not going to be too strenuous or too involved. Obviously, being our first go at a flip lesson, we're not trying to overload you or anything. Quite simply, all we want you to do is have a look at a bunch of characters and see whether or not you think they actually fall under the Byronic Hero archetype, and give us a couple of dot points why. So, you'll be shown a series of pictures displaying a variety of characters from pop culture. Some can be classified as Byronic heroes, and others are quite obviously not. So as I mentioned, all you do is pick the ones you think that fall under it, and tell us why. How you do so is up to you. Dot points or short paragraphs are all acceptable. I'm going to move through the pictures in this screencast, but I think it's best that you view them once over like this and then move back through them at your own pace when you're actually doing the activity. That will give you a bit more thinking time and you won't feel so rushed. Also, if you don't actually know some of these characters, there's no need to worry. There will be links posted below this video to give you brief information and bios about the characters. However, just be careful and watch out for spoilers. You don't want to spoil any of the shows, books, or movies that they're from without actually seeing them. I'd also like to point out that this activity will be the basis or the starting point of our discussion in our next class. So please do try to make an effort to at least attempt a couple of these characters so you can have something to contribute to. Also, if you have any questions or queries about this, as I mentioned in the start, try using the forums page to just talk it out with your peers, because obviously, they're going through the same questions. So, if you have something, feel free to ask it, It could be highly beneficial not only to you, but to everyone else watching this video. So, without further ado, here are the pictures. Alright, so those are our characters that we want you to look at. Give them a once over, read the bios if you have to, and jot down a few dot points. That's pretty much all for today's lesson, so really hope you enjoyed it. This is our first go at it. We'll see how it goes from here on out, and we'll look forward to seeing you all in class. Thank you.